So why don't we get started? Thanks everyone for being with us today. We're here to talk about high-tech entrepreneurship with this panel. So first of all, I'm just going to introduce everyone, and then we might just show a really quick slide deck to put some context around this discussion, and then we'll kick off a bit of a discussion between the four of us, and then there's some roving mics, and we're happy to take questions later on in the session. So. Just a little bit about me as we get started. First of all, I'm the Chief Executive of TechInSA. So TechInSA is a new state government initiative designed to help drive the commercialisation of high-tech products and services for global markets. So we're giving a lot of early stage support to entrepreneurs, startup companies, right across all the different techs, and we'll talk about kind of tech in a minute. I want to introduce the panel, so I'm going to start immediately to my right. No. The other right. The other right. This right. So Stephen Smith. So Stephen Smith is United Focus, owner of United Focus and chair of the Australian Information Industry Association. Stephen's career was as a secondary school teacher, where he taught English, careers ed and IT, and then he wrote and sold a computer program for schools and left teaching to start selling computers to schools. Then in 1995, he founded his own company, United Focus, and it was at the very start of the web. And the aim then and now was to help people and organisations understand the web and how to do business online. In 2011, he joined KPMG, one of the large accounting and advisory firms, to advise their clients about the web, social media and cyber security. And then he went back to being his own boss again at United Focus, where he helps business and governments to create better websites, use social media more effectively, and he gives advice on smart cities and digital disruption. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Smith. Then Marina Pullen. Marina is the Managing Director of MCBI and the local inventor of the award-winning Jungle, which is a private platform to match great people with great opportunities. At MCBI, she works in an Adelaide company that's been around since 2005 and provides progressive solutions to clients who wish to be adventurous. Working with some of the largest organisations in Australia, MCBI helps leaders to take the step towards commercial innovation and trying new ways to operate. Throughout Marina's career, she's held a number of senior roles and runs a variety of complex projects across finance, government, defence and health. She's worked around the world and has a strong commitment to embracing the commercial and social value of diversity in the workplace. In 2016, she was a finalist in the Australian Businesswoman of the Year, and more recently took out the Maths and Data Award at the 2017 Winnovation Awards for her contribution to the digital design of the Jungle. Marina also is a lecturer in innovation at the University of South Australia and a lecturer in entrepreneurship at the University of Adelaide. Ladies and gentlemen, Marina Pullen. And our final panellist today is Tom Hajdu. Tom has the fantastic title of Chief Innovator for South Australia. He's responsible for innovation strategy for the South Australian economy, and he's the driving force behind Adelaide's success in becoming Australia's first gigabit city. In fact, it was Tom's idea, and he made all the connections to enable that to happen with the gang in the US. He's also Chief Executive of Disruptor, a US-based strategic innovation company. Over a number of years, this company has developed a way to create deeper and more creative strategic technologies. Disruptor recently launched two companies, Umbilical, a software development company, and UNet, a new network system. Through his career, Tom has worked with top brands such as Microsoft and Ford, as well as in film and TV studios and best-of-breed advertising agencies. He's a professor and chair of creative technologies at the University of Adelaide. He's director of the Sia Furler Institute, advocating innovation and entrepreneurship in the Faculty of Arts. He received a PhD and an MFA degree from Princeton University and a presidential MBA from Pepperdine University. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Hajdu. So as we kick off, we thought we might kind of try and understand who you are. So I'd kind of like a show of hands if we can. Who's here as a parent? Great. How many of you are university students? Great. How many school students? Right, awesome. Okay, and how many of you are already working, but kind of trying to figure out what else might be out there? Cool. Okay, that's a great mix, isn't it?
Yeah,
wow.
that's good.
I think we put our hands up for quite a few of those.
Yeah.
So there's loads and loads of different ways we can look at high-tech entrepreneurship. So what I wanted to do, first of all, was just quickly step you through a couple of slides which will help to kind of set the scene for what we're talking about today. So first of all, I want you to kind of look at this graph, and I know it's a little bit complicated, but the thing to understand about this graph is this. If you look at the companies where we've lost jobs, there's been 2.5 million jobs lost in the South Australian economy in the Australian economy over the last kind of 8 or 9 years, and all of those have been in companies which are more than 6 years old. All the jobs growth is in companies that are new, and one of the stats I like to say is that startup companies have been responsible for 1.2 million of the 850,000 new jobs in Australia in the last 5 years. Okay? So that's an interesting stat. So it's startup companies that are generating jobs growth. And, but it's not just any startup company. The same is true in the UK. If you look at, this is the Digital Nation, Tech Nation report of the UK government that was just released. And you can see in there that tech jobs, digital jobs, are growing 2 times faster than the rest of the economy, and that they pay about 1.4 times or 44% higher than the national average. So tech jobs are really where the future is at. Interestingly, we rank 7th in the OECD for early stage entrepreneurship activity. That is, lots of people in Australia start businesses, tons of them. But we're not really here to talk about today the people who kind of open up their own hairdressing salon or get a lawn mowing round, or who go and get themselves as an accountant put their own shingle up. We're really talking about the high-tech jobs. And what's interesting is that 77% of job creation in startups comes from only 3% of companies. And it's the high-tech, high-growth, internationally focused companies that are generating jobs growth. And technology is being adopted incredibly rapidly. So this is how long it took for particular technologies to reach their first 50 million users. And you can see it took 75 years for the telephone to get 50 million users, and yet now you can introduce a new app or a new game and you can do it in days. So the pace of change has been dramatic and it's been rapid. And this is the last slide I want to show you, which is about the growth of companies, and this is where entrepreneurship comes in. If you look at the top listed companies in the US versus the top listed companies in Australia, the top listed companies in Australia are all over 100 years old, and they're all in the old economy. In the US, and these dramatically large companies have all been started by high-tech entrepreneurs. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, all started by a high-tech entrepreneur. So there's tons of activity in Adelaide. A lot of it's not visible to you until you start digging around, and when you start digging around, you find there is a stack of support in Adelaide for high-tech entrepreneurs. And here's just some of the companies that are operating in Adelaide, all of which have been started by high-tech entrepreneurs. And some of them you can see are really, really well-established companies, and some of them are brand new and they've only got a handful. Quite a few of these companies are downstairs in the expo. If you haven't been down to have a look around the expo, make sure you do. Okay, so let's begin the discussion. I guess let's kick off with what's high-tech and what's entrepreneurship. So why don't we bounce the ball? What's high-tech and what's entrepreneurship?
Okay, I'll go. Hi. High-tech, I think what we're looking at is technology that requires a considerable skill set and expertise from those practicing it, so you've got to really know your stuff. So there's that. There's also, I think, it's probably more expensive to get into and requires some pretty nifty gear and expensive computer gear and so on. So I think the high tech is not just technology for, say, just not a computer, using a computer and a spreadsheet. It's going to be something a lot more than that. And entrepreneurship, I always think of it as simply someone that's got an idea that wants to start out and take it on their own, develop the idea, and maybe they might employ someone or go in with someone, and they sort of build that idea, get a business plan. And so as an entrepreneur, you're doing something new, really. And if we combine the two terms, what we're saying is people who want to get in the high-tech, really advanced sort of technologies, and are not just going along to a Microsoft or a Google and being an employee there. They're actually using their own smarts to start their own small company.
Terrific.
I might tackle this idea of high tech. I've been in the industry for nearly 20 years, which is a horrifying number when you actually reflect upon it. But I think the definition of high tech is one that is constantly evolving. So what might be high tech, now will become very passé in probably within a year or two. And it seems to be over the years that we have these periods of great explosion of technology and the augmentation of lots of different things coming together. And then we have this relative period of stability where people master that. And it's sort of, we sort of get to this point, we all get artificial intelligence and we all invest our knowledge, and then something else comes along. And then we get this other split up, and the high tech gets redefined again. I personally feel like we're at one of these pivot points where we're seeing the augmentation of all different types of technology coming together. And it's creating an enormous amount of opportunity for people, a lot of confusion as well about which route to go. But I think we're going through one of that. And I imagine we will settle down again in a few more years, and we'll have more defined paths will emerge for people who want to start to learn and generate careers out of these industries. In terms of entrepreneurship, I'll just quickly I'm an entrepreneur and have been for probably my whole life. When I was selling stuff to my brothers and sisters and making a profit, it's in my DNA. But one thing I've learned as being that I think this world is carved up into 3 different stages. And you will have inventors out there, crazy, amazing inventors who will put together really weird ideas. You might be an inventor yourself, and you are genuinely creative and you are free to believe in anything. But the next one is this entrepreneur, who's the people who are willing to take a risk, and they work with inventors or work with themselves to start to move an idea into the commercial world. And think of it like a spectrum. So you start off and you're crazy here, and then you go, I'll get some cash and I'll take it to market. And then one day you go to the other end of the spectrum and you're a business person. And there it's a different skill set altogether, and you sort of pick things up along the way. But I do believe it is different to invention, and it's very different to being a business person as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to pick up on what Marina said with regard to these waves of disruption and then or divergence and then on convergence, maybe change the word high tech to Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
So with regard to what Marina said, there's a very good book by Kevin Kelly, who created Wired magazine, called The Inevitable, which talks about why we're entering this turbulent Industry 4.0 time, which will not necessarily be consolidating anytime soon. Actually might continue to be disrupted for several decades, 2 or 3 decades actually. We're actually very much at the very beginning of it. And in fact, I'm going to tie something else to this argument, which is the slide that you showed of the adoption of the 35 days. Was that Snapchat or something? I don't know what it was. Yeah. So what's happened historically is that whenever there's a new technology, a significant technology like the telephone or the car or something, it takes about 13 years to develop, to be embraced by culture. That's accelerated a lot. It takes now maybe just a few years for that kind of adoption. And so that slide that Joe showed was indicative of that. So I think we're entering a very turbulent time with lots and lots of opportunity. There's no global winners. Nobody has a lead in this. And we're now in that race. We have network infrastructure, which has allowed us to be in that race. And we were, if anybody read The Tyranny of Distance by Blaney, anybody read that book in 1966 by Blaney? No? It's a great book. Well, my argument is that when Elon Musk came here, that was the end of the tyranny of distance, because it happened to have coincided with the changes that are going on in technology, if you read Kevin Kelly's book, and with Elon Musk coming here. So I think we're in a very special time, but I think this time will continue to unfold for quite a while. So we're in a very fortunate position. I could get into lots of demographics and reasons why that is, but that's probably another question.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about entrepreneurship versus kind of going and working for someone. Because, you know, when I left school, most people just kind of went and worked for somebody. And now what we're seeing is a lot of people choose to go work for themselves. So let's talk about that as a choice. And what does that mean? Marina, you've basically run your own race most of your life.
Yeah.
What kind of causes someone to say, you know what? And also, what does entrepreneurship look like? What does it mean? You know, you leave school or university and instead of going to work for someone, you go do your own thing. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I'll answer it in two ways.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to work for IBM and EDS, who are no longer around, which are now HP. I got to work for big global companies, and I got to explore the world, the technology world, under their brand, and it was quite safe. And I learnt an enormous amount about how people, organisations run, and the respect that is extended to really smart people. And there are a lot of benefits of starting off your career working for someone. There's shortcuts, a whole lot of knowledge, and you have access to areas that you wouldn't necessarily have if you're doing it all by yourself. But entrepreneurship, or the idea of being innovative within an organisation, it has similar characteristics to entrepreneurship, but instead of having an open market where you're appealing to potential customers and everyone in the whole world, you're essentially appealing to the people who are within that organisation to be able to get support and to be able to get your idea prioritised and pushed through all the other things that businesses need to do. So imagine it like the bosses are a bit like the Shark Tank, that you've got to be able to convince them as gatekeepers to bring this idea and bring change into their company that's worthwhile enough for them to go through the disruption internally. It's a special skill set. It can be a very lonely skill set, and you see people lose patience. They get fed up with an organisation, they spin out, and they go out to the outside area of it. But it is a worthwhile thing to do. I think I've got a 19-year-old son, and I hope he works for a big global company. I hope he gets in there and he sees what a HR department looks like, and he sees the good and the bad, so then later when he's building his own company, which I'm sure he will, he's already selling stuff to me just like I did. Drives me bananas, but I want him to be able to explore the world with a bit of safety without having to worry about how he's going to pay the bills, that type of thing.
Stephen, you've had a similar experience. You kind of worked for someone, then you worked for yourself, then you went to work for someone, then you worked for yourself. So tell us about that kind of journey and what drove those choices and what the differences were between working for someone and being an entrepreneur inside that company and choosing to work for yourself.
Yeah. Well, it was very interesting. So just to recall for people where I started, I always wanted to be a teacher since I was about 10 years old. And so I finished school, I went to uni, I started in classics and ancient history. How many are doing ancient history now? No one. Yeah, exactly. And so you did ancient.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and but you see, my story was a deputy headmaster at the school I was at said to me in the early 80s. He said, "Look, we won't be teaching ancient history. You've got to think of something else," and showed me this brochure to this course that was being run in the use of computers in classrooms. Now, this is early 80s. Apple hadn't even come here. And so I said, that looked really interesting. So I did this part-time course for 3 years while we were having kids and I was teaching. It was hard yards, but God, it was fascinating. And so out of that, and that was that entrepreneurship. But you know what? I didn't call it that. There was no such word then. I just thought this was really interesting. And when I'd finished the 3-year course, Apple IIe had come out. And I was teaching at Pulteney Grammar, and I convinced them, like you're saying, about how do I get people in there. So I convinced them to buy 2. It came with this little database. I worked out how to program this in BASIC, this little database, to do the Year 12 exam results. They used to come out on sheets of paper that secretaries had to type up, and sort of work out that, oh, damn, I missed out that person, so I got the ranking order in the bin. And anyway, I worked it out. I did a little database. We entered the things and had the results in 2 hours, listed, ascending. And most of you young people, you're saying, like, that is just like picking up a phone. It's so simple. But at the time, it was like, I remember handing this results to the principal of the school 2 hours after the results came out and said, here are all the classes, here are all the... And he thought I was some genius. And I was immediately made assistant to the deputy headmaster at the age of 24. And I was going to say, to all my colleagues that I taught with, so how did you get that, Smith? I said, well, I don't know. I just kind of, I worked hard. I spent 3 years doing this course. But did I have foresight? Was I clever enough to think that would take me there? No. But I think what I learned was that by doing things within this company, the school, you got places. And then I got a job as head of computing at another private school in Adelaide, and I was there for about 9 years. But again, in that, I had to take these crusty old Latin and maths teachers and say, there's this thing called a spreadsheet and a word processor. You can actually use this. Oh, no. And their view was, look, it ain't broke. We're getting great results. Why should I change? So that's, Marina, your point about that inside the organisation, you can be just as entrepreneurial inside as you can out. And then when I left to go out on my own, yes, of course, in 1995, I had to go out on my own and I had to explain to people what the www meant in this web address thing. And why would you ever have an email when you've got a fax machine?
So Tom, you've pretty much been an entrepreneur your whole life?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that to this conversation. So it's true that there's a tremendous amount of value of working within the organization, but I think it's also the case that no incumbent is safe from being disrupted now.
That's right.
The barriers are getting lower and lower to enter a marketplace. So I think that even really big companies can be very vulnerable. The entire markets, like the education system, etc., can be very vulnerable when an Indian guy decides to just teach for free online, etc. So I think we have to be conscious of the tremendous opportunities that we now have, and also as incumbents, the risks that are associated with it.
So tell us about your journey. You
Well, I probably, I don't know how old people are here, but the olden days, days when I was young, my journey was, my partner and I, my business partner and I went to MTV in New York City and said, we think we can make MTV better. In those days, MTV was kind of like radio with somebody that would announce something, and then you'd watch a video, and it was very linear. It was like radio with somebody talking. And shortly thereafter, in the very early 90s, everything became all cut up and chopped up and disconnected and nonlinear, which is what we're used to today on television or commercials or movies or any type of sort of audiovisual media. For better or for worse, that's my contribution to pop culture. So I built actually one of the largest music production companies in the world, having created that. So that was my entree into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, great. So for the benefit of the audience, I mean, what does a high-tech entrepreneurship job look like? What's the range of kind of what people call jobs? Except if you're a high-tech entrepreneur, it's not actually a job. It's something different. What is, nothing for a long time.
And down, up
right.
and down.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just give you
Yeah.
my example, because I have some companies in America, and I also work here. So, but again, I'm sort of a damaged Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver. I was born in Canada, but I lived in New York and Los Angeles for building businesses for a long time. So I think of myself as somewhat damaged as a Canadian in that process. So I'm used to working almost basically every day. That's just the way it is for me. So right now it's still Friday in the States, I've had many, many calls today, and tomorrow I'll probably have a few more calls, and then on Monday, it's Monday here, but it's Sunday in the States. So it's not, culturally, I'm a little bit out of sync with Australia, so I just throw that out there. I'm not sure I get a vote.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about kind of starting out, which I think is where a lot of the folks here are. You know, you want to start out as a high-tech entrepreneur. Where do you start?
May I just maybe answer that? I think it's a really important part because it's connected to starting.
It is. Yeah.
One thing a lot of people don't have a really healthy relationship mentally is with the relationship with money. And you need to have a very clear understanding of what money does for you in terms of it'll cause you stress or it will give you freedom to be able to be an entrepreneur. One of the things I would definitely suggest you do is learn how to manage money. Like learn how to do it, whether it's with your pocket money now or setting aside, whatever it is, master managing money. So you're not going to have the stress or you're not going to have to make rubbish decisions because you've just run out of money. And it is something I see with people who come across in front of me and they pitch ideas. They don't know how to manage money. And for me, as an investor, they represent an enormous amount of risk. I just go, yeah, nah, great idea, but yeah, nah, because I'll probably give you $50 and you'll spend like 60. And there is actually a skill in that. In terms of your question about how do you make money out of it, I would consider myself now as a business person. Probably about 30, around between 30 and 40, I decided that I wanted to make enough money to not be stressed. That was pretty much was my... And so I changed the way I looked at how I invented things. So I wanted to do good, but I wanted to have a sustainable business as well. And I learned how to run money, and it shaped actually everything around it. But the thing that even as a lecturer now, I see all these great ideas coming through and you say, yeah, how much time are you investing in learning how to run the money? At the moment, it's not there. You know, they just go, oh, I'm going to be the next Google. And you go, you know, the Pokemon, that was planned in 2008 to be released. You know, and it went through 2000.
You mean Pokemon Go?
Pokemon Go, sorry. Yeah. And then, so it had a long gestation period. Yeah.
Purposely dumbed down.
But it went through this long gestation period, and that takes patience. You need money and planning to be able to do that. But you might get a bit of a windfall, or you might not.
So management of money, but also management of time.
Yes, same thing. Capital, resources.
In the question, you asked how much you get paid. If you're an entrepreneur, you don't get paid. Because getting paid is you're doing a job for somebody else and they pays you a salary. So being an entrepreneur is doing your own thing. So let's talk about that. You're at uni and you decide, you know what, instead of going to go work for someone, I'm going to do my own thing.
Well, it's about taking risks and being comfortable in making mistakes and asking a lot of questions. I like the Thomas Edison quote, I never failed, I just got closer to the right answer 10,000 times. So I guess you have to be kind of an optimist in a way to take those risks and to be okay with failure. I get very nervous when I'm not failing. Because I feel like there's probably a really big one coming down the line. Especially if you're starting a new company, you want to be making mistakes early and making adjustments early as opposed to going into the marketplace and then having invented like a pretzel shoe or something, which nobody wants. I don't think there's much demand for pretzel shoe.
I'd like to
maybe
see
it's
it
a
though.
big thing. I don't know. I haven't done any market surveys.
I think one of the issues is it's not an all or nothing kind of proposition. So you can be an entrepreneur and have a 2 to 3 day work job. You can be doing other money. So I think you've got to make sure you've got a source of money. And some people I know, someone on an award last night, they're managing the apartment groups that I'm in, but he's also managed to get 2 guys to put some programmers together to do this fantastic app for managing properties. So, but he's just found time to do it, but he's shored himself up by still having a salary coming in.
I think it is an and.
Yeah, it's an and. I don't think it's.
I mean, I will say that just based on my, I've only lived here for just over 2 years, and I am really impressed with the level of education here. We have incredible resources here. And working with people, collaborating with people who think differently than you and who have skills that are different from yours. Naturally, we want to hang out with people that think the same way we do. Don't do that, because then that's not how the world works. We need different kinds of problem-solving abilities and then different skill sets, which create really powerful cross-functional teams. And I think the caliber of the people that, the caliber of the education here is very, very strong. And so I think we have a lot of opportunity here. I could get into a whole thing about that and values and everything, but anyway.
So I mean, if you're kind of at uni, for example, in Adelaide, there's fantastic programs. The University of Adelaide runs the e-challenge program. So if you're at the University of Adelaide, kind of get involved in that. If you're at the University of Flinders, get involved with Venture Dorm at the New Venture Institute. If you're at the University of South Australia, get involved in their Venture Catalyst program. So there's tons of ways for
every university here has an incubator.
Yeah, and they also with Think Lab and NVI. So there's tons of ways that as you're doing your degree and learning your technical skill, you can also be learning how to be an entrepreneur and taking the first steps to do your own startup at the same time.
And if I could just frame it, just to go back to the very first outrageous thing that I said about the tyranny of distance. Why am I saying that? Because you can run a company from here and your market can be all over the world. It's absolutely possible now.
That's what we do. Yeah.
So think, live here, think globally.
Yeah.
So if somebody's in a kind of a normal job and they think, you know what, I want to go work for myself now. I want to be a high-tech entrepreneur. I'm in IT, or I'm in engineering, or I'm in medicine, and I want to go do my own thing. How do they get started? Where do they go? What are the first kind of steps they need to take?
Well, having lived in New York and LA for a long time, there would be no place to go to, really. You'd end up in a cafe or something. Yeah. Here in South Australia, there's a lot of places you can go. So you might want to speak to that yourself, Joe. As well.
Yeah. So I mean, there are lots.
TechInSA is where I would go, probably.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the places. So, the government has the TechInSA is a support agency for high-tech startups, where we have grants for people for the first steps of early commercialisation. So that's one place to go. The university we've already talked about is another place to go. There's a ton of networks around Adelaide, the Smart City Studio, Startup Adelaide.
The incubators, the innovation
universities, innovation precincts, so Tonsley.
Yeah. I think there's no one clear pathway for you. You'll find it when it happens. But I do believe that birds of a feather stick together. And if you're interested in this world, start to open up your own personal and professional network to mix with other people. And I'm always somewhat surprised, but not really anymore, how opportunities seem to miraculously appear. And it's this, you're chatting away to someone and they'll go, actually, do you want to do this? You want to do that? It's this idea of cohorts that, it's so popular now. But I do think you need to expand your network as well, your professional network. Not the the personal one's fantastic and it's great when you get to do business with friends, but having a really purposeful professional network that opens up other conversations and opportunity, I think is a great first step.
I think everything's about networks. It's all forms of networks, whether it's a digital network, a human network, a business network. It's all about these networks, and these networks are now expanding to include South Australia all over the world.
So sometimes it just takes a little bit of bravery to get away from your own home office or sitting in front of the computer at home wondering, look, how can I do this stuff? Just Google these places and get out of the house, go into the city or down to Flinders Uni or wherever it is, and talk to people. The very fact that you're here today is fantastic. This is one of the examples of networking and going seeing people in the exhibition centre and talking to people. And sometimes a bit scary because you think you're a dummy, you don't know anything, you're going to ask silly questions and they'll think you're silly. They won't, because we've all started this, we've all done this together. So get out there, don't sit in your room thinking about this.
So there's a ton of things you can do. You can jump onto meetups, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of meetups in Adelaide that are happening quite regularly. There's Startup Grind, there's all sorts of activities happening, and just connect yourself into. There's Startup Adelaide, which runs a Facebook group that's got 2,000 people in it that are all doing startups. There's a whole bunch of different co-working spaces where you can bump into people who are doing startups. You can go to Think Lab on North Terrace, the university's startup incubator. You can bump into a whole bunch of people who are doing a whole lot of different startups, learning to become high-tech entrepreneurs, and some of them in the early stages and some of them quite well developed. And if you haven't wandered down the expo downstairs yet, I really strongly recommend you do. There's a bunch of companies down there. Some of them are really big corporations, and some of them have been through our program in as little as 9 months ago, and they're already out there employing people, some with 10, 20 people.
Can I just add to some, we work in the United States, China, we have offices in India and in Melbourne and across Australia. And we have a big diversity play. We're actually just naturally curious about different cultures or what have you. But irrespective of where I work, personal and professional branding is really important. It's not what you wear or anything like that. It's not what I'm talking about. It's being really sensitive around what message you're giving to the other people. And I think with these, sometimes, you know, with these startups, everyone tries to rock up like Steve Jobs, and they're trying to have that sort of laid
Black
back
t-shirts.
and, I'm so cool, and, you know, take me seriously. And it might work, but I think it's such a useful thing to reflect on what image are you giving out. Are you giving the image of someone who's hardworking, enthusiastic, willing to learn, willing to actually put your time and effort in to be a part of a great team? Or are you coming across as a bit of a, I hate to say, a little spoilt brat who just wants to do the fun stuff with the beanbags? You know, and it's such a useful thing to sometimes put the mirror up just for yourself, and you'll see opportunities open up, like really big ones that will come through that door, as opposed to birds of a feather. Yeah, let's all hang out in the beanbag together.
Which end of the spectrum do these things start? I mean, you've got someone who might kind of have some really fascinating tech that they're, you know, think, gee, I just wish I could take this to the world, but I don't know how to start a business. I don't know how to be an entrepreneur. On the other hand, you might have someone who says, you know what, I really want to be in my own business. I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know how to do the tech.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can either of those people build a high-tech company?
No,
and
you
how?
need them both. I think you need them both, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to find both. I was reminded when Marina was talking earlier about the skill with money. There's a book put out years and years ago by a guy called Michael Gerber, and it's called The E-Myth Revisited. And he proposes that any successful company has to have 3 types of functions working really well. One is the technical. So you've got to be really good. You can't just turn up because it's going to be fun. So one is technical, one is managerial, and one is marketing. So he gives a great example of this woman that was a great cook. Everyone loved her cakes, and they said, you should start a bakery. You're awesome at cakes. So she did, because she loved cooking. What happened was that she was lousy at marketing, and in fact what happened, it turned from a joyous sort of thing she did as a pastime to being difficult. So she was the technician, yes, but she wasn't good at managing it or at marketing it. So the trick is, Joe, I think you take someone that might have the great technical skill, mixes with a managing skill. So the manager might get out there and say, I'm going to find someone that's got some really smart tech stuff, but I can see that they're a little bit kind of on the computer and not ever looking up, and maybe not great personal skills. I'm going to team up with them and we'll get things happening, and as long as we get a market. So I think that 3 things, technical, marketing and managerial, is absolutely essential for any entrepreneur to make it.
I also want to get back to this idea of money as well that you mentioned. So how much money do you, or it's going to be easier if I just tell you. So for example, the bigger apps that have been made recently, like Airbnb and Uber, cost less than $40,000 to make. Okay? So it doesn't necessarily, everything's being disrupted. Even the finance business is being disrupted. So don't think necessarily that these opportunities are expensive. Sometimes they're not. Yeah. It's about having a great vision and then executing, and then you can build it, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it costs more than that to build Uber at the end of the day, but the actual app itself.
I think the idea for Uber was so interesting. It took 12 years to get it to the critical point, or Amazon.
Sure.
Most of us during that time when we were studying would have been told, how can Amazon continue to exist when it continues to lose money. Because and it was like this weird case study that was always shown to us. But someone had the vision, and someone knew intuitively that patterns of the business were going to go that way.
Well, I have a theory about why it was so successful, and it's because they have great infrastructure, that they invested in their infrastructure, and that's why I think we have a great opportunity to be part of this global race right now, because we were investing in the infrastructure.
And Tom, by that you mean like the broadband connectivity?
Exactly. Yeah. But also we've got great education here. We've got rule of law. Some places don't have that.
How many people think Spotify is an American company? It's a Swedish company, right? So it doesn't matter where these companies come from. There are great global companies being built from Adelaide right now. Some of them are downstairs. So we see a lot of companies coming through our doors. We've had 350 startups through our doors so far this year. We're currently working with 100. Most of them have come from having some great tech. Now it might be ag tech or fintech or space or some drug or Internet of Things. There's a whole ton of different techs here. So remember, we're not just talking about IT and apps. Some of the techs are hard techs and deep techs. Some of them are coming out of the universities. Some of them have jobs full time, and they're doing this stuff at night and on the weekends. And there comes a point where they need to actually get really serious and go full time. And so sometimes they're going to use their savings. Sometimes they're going to sell their house. Sometimes they're going to work all day at a day job and work all night and a weekend on their business. And then there comes a time when they get a great idea and it gets some momentum, and they find people who believe in them, who start to invest in them. And it can take anywhere from 6 months to several years where you might not get paid. But then when it does pay off, the rewards can be huge.
And just to get back to the resources here, the University of Adelaide is one of the top-ranked universities in the world in artificial intelligence, for example. I don't know if you knew that, but there's some amazingly smart people in artificial intelligence here, and that there's way, way, way more demand than there is supply for artificial intelligence right now. So if you've got a great artificial intelligence idea, you might work with somebody there.
Right.
Just on, Adelaide is a fantastic place to live. It is, it's been great for our company. We've been the beneficiaries of we had a partnership with Flinders, a lot of our interns we've hired over the years. But Adelaide's not massively cosmopolitan compared to other big cities of the world. And I share this not as a bagging of South Australia thing, it's not that, but it is something to be really aware of in terms of groupthink and being homogenous in terms of your ideas and your concepts and what have you. And I do encourage you, if you are serious about getting, really serious about the global stuff, go visit the globe. And go and have a look and submerge yourself in different styles of business, which is very, very important. And I'll say this in a very respectful way to, as much as I can, to the Australian style of business. Our style of business is very coarse. We're very brutal and we're very inconsistent. Yet if you go and travel to Asia, and particularly in some of the high end, the style of business is so elegant. But it's got little pitfalls and what have you. There's a whole different style that you need to master if you're interested in being a part of a global organisation. And the same with America, it's a lot more punchy and sharp and what have you. There are all these different flavours, which unless you go and submerge yourself and you go and figure it out and you're curious around their patterns so you can be successful, you will fail. And I'll tell you a really bad story if you want. You want to hear one about me?
Yeah.
Sure, let's tell a bad story. So it is a funny story, but it's a really bad story in the way, same one, so don't judge me. So we do work over in Walgreens. I invented a product and I was all bolshy. Anyway, when you deliver products to the US, particularly big pharmacies, you pay for the right to pitch. So you don't go and do what you do here and weasel your way in and try to get to the CEO and then force an appointment. It's pretty upfront. $120, I get 15 minutes of your time and I come in and do my best job. To cut a long story short, on the spot we took an order for 64,000 units of this thing. And it was a bit scary because we hadn't built one. That's a different story. And
That's an entrepreneur.
it was an extraordinary experience. It was really exciting. But then I had to deal with the Americans, and the American style of business is very punchy, and retail is very punchy. It's like the punchiest of the punchy. And I was getting traumatised. You know, I'm a little sensitive inventor. You know, you should love my idea. Anyway, I had to do the late night calls, as most of us do in the global businesses. And I was at the casino one night. You can probably tell where this is going. And I was drinking too much with some mates, and then one of them went, "Aren't you supposed to be on a call with the US like in an hour?" And I went, "Oh!" And I dashed home and had too much to drink, but I had this Dutch courage. And I was on the phone, and these guys started barking at me, and I barked back and got another deal. And woke up with a hangover and went, "Now I know how to do it in America, just pretend I'm drunk." But it was
don't drink to pretend.
No.
But it was, although it was a bit strange, but it was such an illuminating moment for me, because I had been persevering with this Aussie sort of, do you like me? If you like me, you buy stuff off me type of mentality. And it just smashed like all that paradigm for me. I only share that. Don't like do business and drink like that's the other warning. Like
I can reinforce that. When I first pitched, I pitched into Costco up in Seattle, right? In Costco, we got one store in Adelaide, but if you understood the size of Costco in the US, it's huge. And I went up to Seattle, I had my whole deck, you know, all my PowerPoint slides, I had every little angle thought through, the whole thing. And I signed in at reception and they said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's my laptop." And they went, "Nah, we don't do presentations here." And I was like, "Oh my."
now what
So
do
I
I do?
walked in and they were like, "Tell us how you're going to make more money for us in our stores." That's all I had to tell them. I didn't have that answer. I had all the features and benefits of our product and how good it was and why it was the best. And so we do a lot of work with the companies, the startups that we're dealing with, about how to pitch to the US. And it's exactly that.
It's really
It's
bang.
like, just tell me now. And the other thing that Australian companies do is they spend a lot of time on the tech and on the detail and about making sure that we make money every step of the way. And in the US, it's like, just go for growth. Just drive the top line as hard as you possibly can, and people will believe in your product and investment will come in and you'll start to make money. So,
Yeah, that's how. Yeah.
okay, so I think in the interest of time, we might open it up to the floor and take some questions. We've got a roving mic. Anybody got any questions out there that... There's one here. One down here.
My question is, in a situation where you actually have done an invention and you have patented it in the United States and China and EU, you already have done everything right, and now your idea gets stolen by the biggest companies in the world, like Google and Amazon, what do you do next? And they actually sue you for declaring your patents invalid in their home courts. How do you do that?
Well, I would say that you need a very good lawyer.
Yeah. That's right.
And make sure that your patents were really well written.
Yeah.
You'd also need you also need to get a bit street smart and not play just the legal game, because we had a similar issue in the US where our client dealed us against a competitor and we held the patent. And this wasn't the drunken conversation, but it was I'd learnt from there, and sometimes you have to shift the game to who's going to buy it and make them culpable and forget about trying to take the Googles on, if that makes sense. Like, you shift the game around, but that's that street smart game.
I don't know if this works.
Well,
Just on the patent, a lot of people aren't aware that patents are only recognised for those countries who sign up to the Madrid Protocol, and even that's going through a bit of an evolution as well. It does not protect you globally, and a lot of people waste a lot of money doing that. And if you have a patent written that's so tight that it protects it, which makes it patentable, it makes you vulnerable to one-step variation, and then you can't win.
Well, I have been in technology in the United States for 50 years, and I've been on that side of the line for a long time. But the fact of the matter is, it's not one patent, it's a family of patents, and it's well protected and just bulletproof. And we actually have gone past the stages of jurisdiction and all of those things. And we have had Markman ruling, and we are towards the end of what they call IPR, the second phase of the patent litigation. But still, the costs are tens of millions of dollars if you have been through one of those things. And now, if you prevail, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars, and if you lose, you just go home.
Well, that's why I said you need a good lawyer.
Yeah. We do have good lawyer. We have the best in the United States, Brooks and
And if they're willing to take it on contingency.
Contingency, but you lose how much? 40%.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that's,
No.
You got to fund it somehow.
yeah, that's life. It's
Yeah.
unfair.
That's the way
Life
it
is unfair.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take another question. I think we've.
Happy to talk after.
I wanted to
one
just
up here.
add one thing about the
Please
patent.
do,
Because most
yeah.
people think that Hewlett-Packard, they invented the inkjet printer. How many patents do you think were on the inkjet printer that Hewlett-Packard created?
Oh, loads.
0.
Yeah.
They put all of their patents on the inkjet cartridge. It's all on the ink.
It's fair like that.
So it depends on what you're patenting, which is based on what your strategy is.
So,
Just wondering, probably more for the audience at large, how do you recognise a good opportunity? How do you evaluate a good opportunity? Because you can be the smartest guy in the world, but if it's not a good opportunity or problem that you're solving, it's not going to get you anywhere.
That's an excellent question.
Great
You should
question.
answer that question.
yeah,
Joe?
it's validation, right? So, I mean, you have to knock on a lot of doors and talk to a lot of potential customers to validate. And if people don't want what you're trying to sell, then you're probably wasting your time and money. You should move on to the next thing.
Well, there's also that famous story in Sony with the Walkman, right? Where everybody said the Walkman is a disaster, don't do it, but the CEO wanted to do it. Yeah, so it's a little.
Sometimes you have to, really believe and try and
Exactly right.
get around across the line. But taking a business, the validation step in a business is so critical before people waste too much time and energy.
There might have been a similar story about smartphones as well. People didn't realise they needed smartphones until somebody came up.
It wasn't it Jobs who famously said if we'd asked a focus group about it, we would never have got an iPhone.
That's right.
It's the demand and supply. At one point, you've just got to trust your judgment.
I think there's two different types of ideas as well. There's like incremental ones that you can just sort of solve a problem that's already in the market, and I think they're pretty easy to validate. Those are the big bold ones where you go, wow, I have no idea. I think that's almost instinct or intuition that kicks in, whatever that vague thing is. But I think they are two different types. The low risk ones are, let's get an app for that. And that's what they typically get solved with.
And there's also a tension in the big, crazy ones because oftentimes the business models are unclear. So take, for example, something that you want to be ubiquitous. If you want it to be ubiquitous, it's got to be free, right? Typically speaking. So you might use an open source thing of something or other. Okay, so now how do you make money? So it becomes a little bit more challenging. Now, fortunately, I'll give you an example because a friend of mine created the Zigbee, which is the largest Internet of Things protocol. And they thought it would be huge, and they raised $80 million, and they sold the company for $80 million because they realized they couldn't make money on a protocol. But now you have what's called an initial coin offering. And if they didn't have initial coin offerings when Zigbee was created. So, an initial coin offering is a way that you can raise money. It's a new way to raise money, basically. And that fits actually very well with open source. So, the world is, as I say, I keep coming back to this idea, the world is evolving very, very quickly. You have to be, it's good to be a specialist, but it's also good to kind of notice the landscape and see where the opportunities are to connect these various things that may be disconnected or disjunct from each other.
Question here. That's all right. It's coming.
Run.
Yeah.
Is there any body, a group of people or legal sort of system that sort of sets the bar for apps and things? Like says, no, that's not appropriate, or is there
You mean at
any
Apple,
governing
for example?
kind
Or
of system?
at Apple, for example?
No, just in general, like you're saying, anyone can make an app, it only costs $40,000, we'll get it out there. Is there any sort of governing sort of body?
Well, each Apple you have to submit it to Apple or to Android, and so it has to get through that system. It's really important to realize that the vast majority of apps, nobody cares about, right? The vast majority of apps. There's this idea called the long tail, which has this idea that, the idea was, well, if everything becomes democratized and the barriers become very low, there's this long tail where everybody gets a little bit of attention. But that's actually not really how it works. What happens is you end up getting like 4 apps, and the millions of other apps basically nobody pays any attention to. The probability of getting an app really noticed is as much about marketing and lots and lots of other things as it is about the actual app itself.
So there's in a technical sense, there's a body called the World Wide Web Consortium, and they've been around since about 94, 95, set up by the guy who started the web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. And they have working groups that set the standards that everyone's got to follow. And if you don't follow it, well, you just won't get there. So there are technical standards being set worldwide by these consortiums of which Australia is a member. And then, as Tom said, then there's Apple themselves or the Android people would look at something and say, that's not going on any of our platforms. It's dodgy or whatever it is. And then there's just simple law, like you can't actually put something up there that breaks a law or of any kind. So there are various systems there that regulate it.
But it does, when you publish an app to the Apple Store, you have to submit it and it gets evaluated. Mm-hmm. The evaluation process is largely, for big issues on it, some of the nuances around diversity or discrimination country by country are not. So there are some gaps around that, which is typical on the internet, but they have a big focus on the performance, and Apple, they will scrutinise it. Google or the Android is nowhere near as much. You can slam stuff up there, but and it might fall apart, no one cares.
And just so you get a sense, I think about 70% of the apps are never actually downloaded, and of the 30%, the vast majority are only used once. So it's a very, very low number.
Yeah.
We've probably got time for one more question if there's a... Madam.
Pretty much basic question, but what do you think are the qualities required for a person to become an entrepreneur?
An entrepreneur?
Or makes them an entrepreneur?
The qualities required.
Yeah.
Well, I know what it is for myself. I might not want to hear it because it's not. I think it's existentialist dread, but
that's wow.
But that's just one person's opinion. Probably not
but I would like to become an entrepreneur, but I have a feeling that I don't have the qualities. It's a vague thing. So how can I judge, or how can I pursue to become an entrepreneur? Or is it a waste of time because I don't have the qualities?
No. It's perseverance. It's all,
tenacity, hard work,
optimism, hard work.
It was interesting working in companies like I was with KPMG for a number of years, and there were those that you could tell were just really comfortable being there and getting a salary every week. And that just does it for them. And that's great. And others get itchy feet, like I did. I was there for 4 or 5 years, and I thought, no, I've had enough of this. And I wonder what on earth I did that for, because now you're out and you sort of worry a bit about, where the money's coming from next month. But so if you're going to worry about where the money's coming from, and it really gets you, then it's probably not for you. But I think it's about commitment. It's about having some technical skill, about just being able to persevere when things are going a little down. Make sure you've got lots of good people around you.
Yeah, we at the firm, where at MCBI, we classify people basically into being inside cats, and they like hanging on the windowsill in the sunlight, just so you described, and they love it. They purr and they're happy. And then we've got outside cats, where if you they're always scratching at the door, and you got to let them run out. And it's funny, both of those groups, they actually quite like their names. They're like, yeah, no, I'm an inside cat. I'm happy here. Like,
Yeah.
And the outside cats are like, what? I'm off. I would say the normal things that you read everywhere about an entrepreneur, you know, all that hard work, tenacity, believing in yourself, resiliency, they're all like ticks. But I do believe there's a new one emerging, and it's about being a good person. There's this authenticity thing that's emerging as a really big thing in business, and I have a very strong view on it. Once you've done me wrong once, I'll never do business with you again, ever. Yeah. And that's a really new thing. It was actually quite an old thing, about 100 years old. Yeah. But it's come back into play now, and it's almost like the greed is good and all that shyster moving around stuff has gone through its evolution, and it's close to being dead. And there's this new thing that's coming through about authenticity and being able to look people in the eye and shake hands, which is new. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, if they're smart, they'll get to know themselves and know their style, and they'll amplify their authenticity, which is different, I think.
Well, I wanted to key off on that. That's kind of one of the reasons why I live here. I think that the values of South Australia are extremely strong, and I could do a whole talk on that, but I'm not going to. But it has to do with authenticity. So I think as we have a seat at this global table of Industry 4.0, bringing our values to the table is extremely important. And then the market will decide. So the history of South Australia, how South Australia was created, and the values of everybody gets a fair shake, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, fair play. These are not, that's what I was saying earlier, these are not values all over the world.
No.
And so I think we need to be very proud of the culture that's here and lead with that.
Great, and that's probably a great point to wrap this thing up. And the great thing about the time that we live in, this early 21st century, is there has never been a better time to build a global business from Adelaide. You can. And there's a ton of help for you if that's what you want to do. So let's wrap it up. And I want to thank very much our panel, Marina Pullen, Stephen Smith, and Tom Hajdu. Thanks very much.